All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2021 National Outdoor Recreation Conference. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Candace Gallagher. I am from American Trails, and we have jumped in to support our friends at the Society of Outdoor Recreation Professionals to produce this conference. And SORC provides leadership for the outdoor recreation profession through skill development, networking, and technical guidance. And for this session, we've got two 20-minute live sessions, one after the other. And if there's any time at the end, which there should be, we can do some Q&A. But I invite you guys to ask some questions, during the presentation. And we are here together. I'm going to go through a few housekeeping items and just changing my slide here real quick. We are here together in an inclusive and brave space. A brave space is a place where participants feel comfortable learning, sharing, and growing. A brave space is inclusive to all races, sexes, genders, abilities, immigration status, and lived experiences. And the chat is open, so feel free to introduce yourself. This will go to all of or make sure you do it to all the panelists and attendees so they can see it. And we welcome you to utilize the chat for general conversation, sharing resources, that sort of thing. So don't be shy. For the Q&A, feel free to type them in any time into the Zoom Q&A. And if time allows, we will make time at the end of the hour. This session is being recorded, and the NORC recordings will be available for 3 months following the conference through Whova, which is the conference platform. And CEU credits are also available for free through American Trails. I'm the one that handles that, actually. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. And while we, of course, wish we could be together in person, we want to encourage you to network with one another and take full advantage of the opportunities to connect through the Whova app. Be sure to complete your profile in Whova, and then you can reach out, you can exchange contact information, you can schedule meetups, post discussion questions. The Whova networking platform will be available for 3 months following the conference as well. And the theme for the conference is outdoor recreation, from resilience to transformation. And we are excited to host over 40 sessions and 80 speakers who are sharing stories and examples from the field of transformative solutions that address the biggest challenges in outdoor recreation, whether they be social, environmental, or economic. So we are so thankful to our speakers and for joining us today. And with that, I would like to introduce the first session. So we have prioritizing trails in New York City. We have Julia Raskin, who is the who's the Trails Program Manager with the Natural Areas Conservancy in New York City. And we also have Crystal Crown, who is the GIS Analyst and Data Manager with the Natural Area Conservancy in New York City. So I will give control over to Crystal and Julia.
Hello, everyone. My name is Julia Raskin. I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay. It's like it's loading. Here we are. Hi, everyone. It's afternoon here, so good morning where you are, but good afternoon from New York. Thanks for being here today. My name is Julia Raskin. I'm the Trails Program Manager at the Natural Areas Conservancy, which I'll be calling the NAC in this presentation. The NAC is a nonprofit partner to New York City Parks, helping to manage and restore 20,000 acres of forests and wetlands since 2012 on New York City parkland. Our team of scientists and experts promote nature's diversity and resilience across the 5 boroughs, and we work in close partnership with the City of New York. Since 2017, we work in partnership with the Parks Department on the citywide trails team, which works to formalize and maintain the nature trails going through these natural areas throughout the city. So this is our agenda today. I'm going to speak about the Strategic Trails Plan, which is kind of the precursor to what we're talking about today, which is prioritizing which trails we work on in New York City. And that really came out of the Strategic Trails Plan, which we released this past summer in June. I'll talk about what is trail formalization. What do I mean when I say we are working to formalize trails? And then Crystal will speak about the actual process for how we're prioritizing which trails we work in. So the strategic trails plan, as I mentioned, we released it this summer. So New York City's trail networks are made up of over 350 miles of nature trails that offer parkgoers a range of experiences, from forests to coastal wetlands and marshes, all of which connect people to the vast natural areas of New York City parks. So in partnership with the Parks Department, the NAC created the first strategic trails plan to inform the management of the nature trails citywide. This plan was informed by months and months of inventory and analysis of the existing trails and an extensive public and internal outreach process with trail stakeholders. The plan lays out a vision for the citywide trail system. It lists goals to help realize that vision and details key recommendations to achieve those goals. We won't be going into all of it today because we don't have enough time and it's quite a hefty document, but it really quantifies the investment required to build and maintain a citywide trail system by leveraging public, nonprofit, and corporate investment to realize the full potential of the trail system. So this plan also includes trail management and design guidelines that the NAC and its partners will use as a template for future trail work. And that's kind of where the prioritization framework that we're going to talk about and the matrix came out of. And this plan is funded by the Helmsley Charitable Trust. So a really big shout out and thanks to them for giving us a 3-year horizon to build out this program. And also a big thank you to REI for their support in this endeavor as well, because it's a big one. So here's a trail overview of when I mentioned that we did a lot of kind of research before we created these recommendations. This is kind of what we found in that research. So beginning in 2013, New York City Parks mapped all existing nature trails across New York City parks using handheld GPS devices. This recorded information about trail surface type, width, class designation, and difficulty. So the majority of trails are concentrated in these 8 parks. Natural areas with trails are concentrated really in 75 of the city's park properties, and the vast majority of those are really located at the coastal edges of the cities in the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, and Staten Island, largely because they've kind of escaped the impact of urban sprawl by being out on those edges. And 1.34 million New Yorkers, which is more than 15% of the city's population, actually live adjacent to natural areas with trails. So through additional programming and marketing and just work on these trails, there's opportunity to further increase the number of New Yorkers traveling to the trails and really fully engage the communities that live close by. So here's our vision, and using all this information that we gathered, which I've only kind of given you a little taste of, we created this vision for the citywide nature trail system. And the plan puts forth 6 overarching goals towards our vision of this well-maintained, fully supported nature trail system. And those come with recommendations, each goal, and we plan to accomplish all of these by working with New York City Parks and with the support of our conservancy partners throughout the city. So I'm going to focus on one really big part of this plan, which is trail formalization. So one of the biggest goals of the plan is to formalize the entire nature trail system in all 5 boroughs. So this means that when anyone goes out to a trail, they should be able to very easily navigate the network. It should be well marked, well maintained, and there should be a public facing map available to anyone who wants to reference it. Many of the trails existing today, I mentioned that number of 350 miles. So many of those are considered informal trails. Some people might call them desire lines. And this has led to a real need to create a formalized strategy and unifying the system and identify the resources needed to bring them into this universal standard of care and management to make sure that the trails are well maintained and that people can navigate them. And so that they contribute to the health of the forest as well. Once formalization is complete, once we've kind of gone through all 350 miles, we estimate that the citywide trail network will consist of about 247 miles of official trail. Once all of those desire lines are restored back to a healthy forest. And so far, we've formalized 136 miles of trails in 19 parks throughout the city since 2016. So this is an example of what ideally formalization would look like. You see on the left is before, you see kind of this web, imagine hiking on that. I'd be like, where am I, right? So, and then look to the right after, much more clear. So, much more navigable and also less fragmented. So it's much healthier for the marsh and grassland ecosystem that is in Marine Park. And this is in Brooklyn, for anyone who may know New York City. This is a map. I mentioned that kind of the final step of formalization is having public facing maps that people can reference. So this is what that looks like. And you can find these at New York nycgovparks.org/facilities/hiking trails. It's not always the easiest thing to find, but if you type in hiking trails in New York City, you will have access to all these maps. So I mentioned these trail management and design guidelines. So the goal is really to adopt consistent approaches to design and maintenance of nature trails across the city. That's a big goal of the strategic trails plan. So all stakeholders working on trails should have the same goals in mind and the same strategies and techniques that they're using. And this, includes things like, how do you decide what is a desire line and what is an official trail, for example. It also includes just kind of some basic care of how to take care of different types of trails with different types of substrates, what tools you use. There's a whole slew of information in here that's really great. The prioritization matrix is one of these important tools in this suite of trail management tools because it gives us a data-driven and objective view of where trails need to be formalized most in the city. And so this helps us create an efficient annual work plan, and it also provides important context when we discuss formalization decisions with park managers. So that's why we've enlisted Crystal Crown, our GIS analyst and data manager, to help us with that. We'll hear about how we organize the information and what information we wanted to use to actually prioritize the parks in a matrix to give us a list of where we will work in 2022 and beyond. And these were some of the questions, like, how do we currently choose where we work, and how can we kind of institutionalize that and look and what data is even available for us to be able to prioritize that information, and what additional criteria that we haven't been considering in all of our work do we want to start considering. So that's where Crystal came in and really helped us out. So I'm going to hand it over to her to start talking about that process.
Great, thanks, Julia. Can you advance to the next slide?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. All right, so this map here shows the location of the 33 trail networks that require prioritization, which combined contain over 70 miles of trails. So faced with this quantity of trails, we had to decide how we wanted to prioritize, and we ultimately landed on taking a data-driven approach by creating a composite index, which is essentially an index that you create by pulling together data from multiple different variables, scoring and weighting them, and then rolling them together into a single index that can be sorted and ranked. Next slide. So the scoping process for deciding what data to include was very time consuming, since it required us to drill down into what we find important, but then also we had to ensure that pertinent and high quality data existed to describe those things. And that wasn't always the case. So this process took several iterations before landing on a final set of components that we felt adequately described the elements that we wanted to include and that we cared about. Next slide. So the result of the scoping process was data that falls into these 5 broad categories, which are logistics, data quality, use proxies, a combination of environmental justice and public health, as well as ecosystem sensitivity. And this chart here shows what percentage that each of those contributes to the final score for a trail network. Next slide. So our logistics category pertains to baseline staffing and planned capital work. And the result of this category is the higher ranking of trail networks where staffing is available and capital work is planned. Next slide. The data quality category pertains to how confident we are in our own trail data, which Julia mentioned before. We went out into the field and collected data on all of the trails. And data quality is important since formalization requires having thorough information about trail segments. So the result of this component is the higher ranking of networks that we believe have more reliable data. Next slide. This category, which is trail use proxies, is by far the largest and has the most components. We didn't actually have access to direct data on how many people are using our trails. So the components in this category are all measures that will help us, or we believe will help us estimate trail usership. And the final goal of this category is to weight trails higher where the estimated usership is higher. Next slide. And this category is a combination of environmental justice and public health. In the scoping process, we knew that we wanted to include elements of both environmental justice and public health. And it turned out that indexes for this actually already exist and are published by the EPA. So we chose to use an air quality index that they've published that takes respiratory hazard data and then further weights it by demographic variables like income and racial breakdown of census blocks. So the goal of this is to rank networks higher where health and social risk is higher. Next slide. And then our final category is ecosystem sensitivity, which pertains to the presence of trails in sensitive habitats. So the goal of this category is to rank our trail networks higher that are near sensitive areas in order to mitigate damage through strategic formalization. Next slide. So for all these categories, we chose to score the individual components as percentages since they're easier to interpret for anybody who might encounter the final matrix. But the scoring for the components was done differently based on the type of data that we were working with. So for categorical and presence absence variables, those were interpreted by experts and assigned percentages. For quantitative components, which are continuous or numerical, we chose to use the percent of the maximum score within New York City in order to scale the data to our geography of interest. And then finally, that EPA index for air quality and environmental justice, that's already presented by the EPA as a percentage. So we incorporated that directly into the matrix unmodified. Next slide. So here I just want to highlight two examples of how data was processed and incorporated into the matrix. This example here is community science visits, which is one of the components of the trail use proxy category. And this data set or this variable is derived from eBird and iNaturalist data sets, which I think many of you are probably familiar with. These data sets consist of user-submitted flora and fauna observations, which also have associated spatial data. And this variable felt especially important to include because these were the only accessible data sets that provided information on users who are visiting our parks for the express purpose of interacting with natural spaces. So to turn this into a score, we chose to download data for 5 years preceding when we constructed the matrix. And we extracted all of the observations that fell within 100 feet of our parks of interest. So on the map on the right here, each of the dots, both gray and pink, represent a user-submitted observation around New York City. And you can't tell from this, but there are actually millions upon millions of them. And then the ones in pink are the ones that fall within the allotted proximity to our parks of interest, which require formalization. So to turn this data into a score for the network, I counted the number of unique username and date combinations within a park, and then used that as an estimate of the number of visitors over the past 5 years. The networks were then scored as a percentage of the maximum value in the city and then weighted before being incorporated into the index. Next slide. And then similarly, for the Environmental Justice Air Quality Index, we downloaded the spatial data from the EPA and extracted the index values that fell within 1/4 mile of our parks of interest. So in the map on the right, the pink color scale shows the values that were considered for each trail network, where the darker colors indicate worse air quality and the lighter colors indicate better. So to score these, we assigned the maximum value for each of the networks that surrounded the network and assigned that as the score, and then weighted it and incorporated it into the final index. Next slide. So this table here shows an example from the final ranking table. On the left, you have a trail network name, and it's 10 networks. And then in the middle is the scores for each of the individual components that I described. And then on the right side, you have the total score, which is calculated by multiplying each of the individual components by the weights and summing them together. And as you can see, some of the values are really close together, but it still allows us to rank them relative to one another and help us direct work. Next slide. There we are. And then finally, here's a map of the final product, which is the prioritization of the 33 networks. And the darker colors represent trail networks that have a higher ranking, and the lighter colors represent lower. We are now currently using this to help us plan formalization for the coming seasons. Next slide. So thank you for joining our session. And just to note, there was a lot of detail left out of the deck to save time. So if you want to know more, please reach out to us via our email addresses that are listed here, and we'd be happy to talk further.
Great. Thank you so much, Crystal and Julia. I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm going to just introduce the second presenter here. So we have, make sure that's on the, sorry about this. Let's see. Okay, so the second session will be fostering belonging and resilience in a changing community. And we have Sharon Yazowski, who's the Executive Director of Mortimer and Mimi Levitt Foundation. So I will give control over to Sharon.
All right, I'm just going to share my screen here. Great. All right, hello, I'm Sharon Yazowski, the Executive Director of the Mortimer and Mimi Levitt Foundation, and we are a creative placemaking funder. So today I'm going to share an overview of the Levitt Foundation and our work with communities, and I'll also share some findings of the Levitt Foundation's current research using Levitt venues as case studies. So I'll share how our research has informed how we approach placemaking to authentically reflect and be inclusive of the communities that comprise a neighborhood, a town, or a city, including when communities are experiencing change and demographic shifts. The Levitt Foundation exists to strengthen the social fabric of America. We partner with communities to transform underused outdoor spaces into welcoming destinations where the power of free live music brings people together and invigorates community life. Levitt is all about creating places where everyone is welcome, where people of all ages, of all backgrounds can come together through the shared experience of free concerts. All Levitt venues and concert sites are in outdoor public spaces, majority of which are parks. And the Levitt Foundation believes that accessible outdoor public spaces are a key element to healthy, sustainable, equitable communities. At their best, public spaces are where communities come together. They are platforms for civic engagement, for social dialogue, where neighbors meet, where strangers can easily interact with one another, and where people can share a sense of belonging. Public spaces have the potential to be a powerful equalizer in our communities, and it's through that lens that the Levitt Foundation approaches our work with communities. Levitt uses the power of music, the power of the outdoors, the power of free to build community through music. So this is the Levitt Network. The Levitt Foundation currently partners with 27 communities of all sizes across the country. Our network includes permanent Levitt venues. These are in large metro areas, and these tend to present between 40 to 50 free concerts every year. And the pink dots represent Levitt AMP communities. These are small to mid-sized towns and cities presenting 10 free concerts, and these concerts take place in either the summer or fall for both permanent Levitt venues and AMP sites. And you can check out all of our Levitt locations on our website. But you can see we're in Alaska, the West Coast in Los Angeles, middle of the country, Denver, Arlington, Texas, central Wisconsin to down to Florida, rural Appalachian, all the way up to Vermont. So a range of communities represented in the network. All Levitt venues and Levitt AMP sites share hallmark characteristics. They all have high caliber artists performing a range of music genres, and range of cultural performances are included in every concert series at each location. Every venue is family friendly. All concerts are free. And they have, you can see from the photos, an open lawn setting. So people can have what we call a 360 experience. People can easily connect with people in back of them, to the front of them, on the side of them. People can spontaneously get up and dance with those they've never met before, whose paths they wouldn't cross otherwise. Children can run together. That open lawn setting is really conducive to social connection. And you'll see in this collage, there's just as many photos of the lawn as there are of the stage performances, because both are equally important in creating realizing the mission of building community through music. So the lawns are activated in a way to highlight other nonprofits, community groups, local businesses, local vendors. And these venues, in addition to being concert venues, are also community destinations that have a multitude of other events and activities throughout the year. But what happens on the lawn is just as important as what happens on the stage. Typical of creative placemaking. So I mentioned we are a creative placemaking funder, and creative placemaking has evolved into a community-driven process that situates arts and culture within broader community vitality strategies. So the Levitt work in communities is creative placemaking work. So through community-driven and community-engaged design, creative placemaking can shape and often transforms the physical, social, and economic qualities of a neighborhood. It builds upon existing assets, and it's a collaborative process that should connect people to each other, as well as connect people to place. And creative placemaking is a collective reimagination of the way people can experience a place. So when building upon a community's existing assets and authentic narratives, a range of perspectives, insights, and experiences to reflect what was, recognize what is, envision what can be, inspires the creative placemaking process and shapes the project, contributing to more equitable, sustainable, and healthy outcomes. So I'll now speak to the Levitt Foundation's research and learnings as a creative placemaking funder over the past decade, and how our research has informed our practices to foster a sense of belonging and create more inclusive spaces. So in 2016, we launched an impact study, as the Levitt Foundation's mission is to strengthen the social fabric of communities. We wanted to get a deeper understanding of the Levitt program through the lens of social impact. So while our audience data showed diverse audiences in terms of age, race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic groups, we wanted to know, were these diverse groups connecting while at the concerts, or were they experiencing the concert in the same space but in siloed groups? So we published this paper on the screen in 2016, but going back 3 years earlier in 2013, the Levitt Foundation contracted Slover Lynette, a third-party research firm, to conduct a multi-year, multi-pronged study focusing on community engagement, community-level outcomes, and social capital and social connectivity based on diverse groups of people participating in a shared experience. This white paper, as I mentioned, was published in 2016, and it is available on our website, levitt.org. And amongst other findings, the research showed how the experience of free Levitt concerts fosters social interactions within groups, as well as across demographic boundaries, which in turn builds social capital being the value that is derived from existing within and being connected to social networks. So this answered the question of how are people interacting? How are people connecting at the concerts? So the opening and welcoming environment at Levitt Concerts offers a hybrid experience of the arts and community connection, which creates social friction, which means bringing different people together in a defined space in ways that support both social bonding and social bridging. Social bonding are the ties that connect individuals who are similar to one another. So building stronger ties within friend groups, family groups, or within an existing social group of like characteristics, like same gender, same race. Social bridging is points of connection, understanding, and exchange across diverse social groups or communities, building social connections across demographic boundaries, which is key to the Levitt mission of strengthening the social fabric of communities. And so why is it important to invest time and resources into programs that build social capital? Well, higher social capital equals healthier communities and greater social cohesion, and ultimately greater community attachment. So included in that multi-year, multi-pronged study, we also wanted to gain a more in-depth understanding of one Levitt venue site over time by conducting a pre-post intervention study. So we conducted a study of Levitt Pavilion Denver, which opened as a venue in 2017 in Ruby Hill Park in Southwest Denver, which was an underused public park with a complex history, like many parks that are underused and have been disinvested for a couple of decades. So with the pre-intervention data that was collected in 2013 and so 4 years before the venue opened, and then post-intervention data was collected in 2019, 2 years after the venue opened. And that was actually during the third concert season. So for context, the neighborhood is surrounding the park is low to middle income, primarily Latinx. And the community went through a master planning process in the early 2000s and identified an amphitheater as a priority amenity for the park. The Levitt Foundation was asked to be a partner in 2011. For time, I'm not getting into the methodology of the study, but that is also available on our website. So with the first phase of the study, released in 2016, we gained an understanding of how people are engaging with one another on the lawn and how that affects community level outcomes, including building social capital. With this second phase of the study, we wanted to gain an understanding of how people, specifically the local community, are engaging with the process of developing and shaping the Levitt program over time and the ongoing activities of a Levitt venue over time. What does that engagement look like with ongoing activities? So what I'll be sharing next is equitable engagement practices that surfaced from the pre-post intervention study at Levitt Pavilion Denver. This white paper was published in spring of this year, 2021, and can also be found on the website. And what I'll be sharing is not so much actionable items. These are more practices, processes, and approaches to equitable engagement to incorporate while programming and activating outdoor spaces in order for any public space to foster a sense of belonging, genuine community engagement, and a community-driven process must be a top priority for the project. And I will note that these approaches take time, and many of these approaches just involve listening, stepping back, and creating space for others to lead. So building upon a community's existing assets. So in this work, find multiple opportunities to identify, honor, and incorporate a community's existing assets. Take time to become familiar with the community's existing assets and work to understand how different people view tangible and intangible assets in their communities, how different cultures may view assets in different ways, and consider how the new figurations of a public space, any new amenities or new programs may impact current uses as well as current users, and recognize that those impacts, while viewed as improvements, may be considered positive by some, but also negative by community members because it affects current users as well as hopefully inspires new users. So as an example of how this can translate into an outdoor space, is listening to and learning from the range of local communities and incorporating cultural practices and traditions into your site activation as well as programming. So here's an example of Levitt, Denver. I mentioned the park is situated in a primarily Latinx community, and so they have incorporated Latin music programming and performances into their concert series. But it's not just the Levitt, Denver team booking these bands. There's a community engagement process where the community is informing the curation of this programming, and they're informing the outreach strategies and the lawn activation to complement this programming. So it isn't just booking an act, it's a holistic process of how this programming is coming to life. So strive also in building upon existing assets, strive to tie into other efforts to amplify positive outcomes, being part of a chain of change. So what that means is there is no single isolated investment in a community, whether framed as placemaking or another project, that on its own can confront and reverse systemic historical inequities that affect participation of a space. Instead, we can connect to larger conversations and how projects can intentionally and equitably contribute to shaping change in complex systems. So consider ways to form connections to other local nonprofits, community groups, and consider how the project functions as part of a chain of change, spurring additional engagement and new alliances or initiatives that build toward same goals and reinforce shared priorities. Creative placemaking work is not neutral, and acknowledging that, particularly when it involves components that are closely tied to individual and community identities. So communities are never monolithic, and in some instances, activating public spaces can lead to perception of both inclusion and exclusion, current users, new users, et cetera, which may unintentionally exacerbate inequity. So practice awareness of and discuss power imbalances when different populations express different priorities for involvement and engagement in your outdoor space. Oftentimes, programming a public space means making choices of whose culture, whose values, whose stories, whose vision, whose aesthetics are being put forward. So think, how can a both and approach be incorporated by offering multiple communities, multiple ways of connecting with the space and with each other and with the community at large? Denver, I mentioned the Latin music programming, but they're also reaching out to other communities through the same process. They did a weekend called Taste of Middle East, which included programming, interactive audience activities, immersive experiences with food and crafts. And this again was driven by members who represent various Middle Eastern communities, very much a community-driven process to use the space to be part of reflecting and engaging multiple communities within the greater Denver area. Community-defined goals and aspirations. There's two types of community sessions, which inform, the one is informing. One community session is people come to the table, planners come to the table and say, hey, this is what we've done. What do you think about it? But there's really no engagement or interaction. The most beneficial community sessions are knowledge producing community sessions where there's actual engagement that taps into people's lived experiences and perspectives and imagination. And these sessions can result in ideas and programming that are most reflective of the local community and will resonate most deeply with a community. So it's important to involve communities in co-equal ways in placemaking work, particularly in defining desired outcomes. So make space for open-ended conversations with communities, listen to their needs rather than coming to a table with pre-existing ideas or plans. Consider a shift from providing programming to creating a space for collaboration and imagination and an asset-based approach. And then learn from deep-rooted resiliency in communities and creating plans, and again, create an environment that helps create plans for those that are most impacted by use of the space and their ideas shaping the space and creating solutions, because it's through their lived experience that you will have a most authentic result in activating the space. So partnerships and collaborations are essential in creative placemaking and activating public spaces. Partnerships allow a project to tap into a range of participants, a broad cross-section of the community, and they help build trust among residents. And partnerships with a range of groups can also ensure a project's long-term sustainability and ongoing relevance to a community's aspirations. So when developing partnerships, also take note of larger movements of change and public investment in the community, and intentionally connect to and build on those, similar to the approach of being part of a chain of change. So think of being part of an overall ecosystem, building reciprocal relationships, and how can your project provide support to other local nonprofits and contribute to some positive change in the neighborhood outside of your public space. This is an example of Levitt Denver working in the community and having a reciprocal relationship with other nonprofits, where they're taking their artists into these nonprofits, connecting with youth, and then also providing a platform for youth to showcase their talents on the stage. So going out into the community, as well as inviting the community into the space. And there's a reciprocal energy happening that are serving the same goal, which is to provide access to the arts to youth and a platform for youth to showcase their talents. So make time from the outset to consider potential challenges and opportunities in different communication models, approaches, and priorities amongst project partners. Just be in tune that different groups communicate differently. They have different work modes. And what does that look like going into a partnership and being open to shifting how you might and your group might traditionally work, so that the partnership can be mutually beneficial. Collective memory. So recognize that collective memory of a project's origins may fade and be replaced by new perceptions. And this makes ongoing communication important, because placemaking processes, investments in public space can sometimes occur over long periods of times, and in some cases, years. There can certainly be issues of collective community memory. So in the case of Levitt Pavilion Denver, we found in our research that some current residents of the Ruby Hill neighborhood assumed that the amphitheater had been developed for current and new residents, when in actuality, the concept of the amphitheater came about 15 to 18 years prior by the local community, saying that was a priority amenity for them. But because that story over time had been lost, the perception had shifted that this amenity was for new residents. So we learned that this makes ongoing communication important to keep the founding aspirations and values of a project, to keep that relevant to all community members over time. It's important to put mechanisms into place that keep the true story visible to the community, reminding people how and why a project was undertaken. And then with stewardship of collective memory, the story of the project becomes one part of the set of assets that the creative placemaking work can build upon. So I'll close with sense of belonging. I might go 2 minutes over, but I was told we have a little bit of extra time, so I'll take that 2 minutes if that's all right. So with sense of belonging, take the time to think through the complexities of creating a sense of belonging across and within multiple communities, given any pre-existing inequities. So really think about, how can a project be structured so one feels they belong? We've learned with Levitt, just because you say it's free and everybody's welcome, that doesn't mean people will come, because people need to feel that they belong in a space to want to participate. So have candid conversations during planning phases about ways that belonging at your specific site, in the neighborhood, in the general area, might be connected to historical or current realities regarding race, class, poverty, discrimination, and how does that affect one's sense of belonging in the place, and look for ways to enhance belonging and create a space for more personal input, so participants feel empowered to influence the way the site is activated and how the site is programmed. And discuss how fostering a sense of belonging among one community may push away another. So think creatively about ways to foster multiple kinds of belonging in a community or in a space that can accommodate multiple communities. How can you have a breadth of programming? How can you activate multiple ways, multiple times throughout a certain period of time? And be cognizant of how your messaging that this space is for everyone and be consistent in that the space is being designed for everyone. So again, that contributes to sense of belonging and resonating amongst a range of communities. And also think through the physical attributes of a placemaking project and how that guides how people participate in. An example of that is the open lawn setting at Levitt Lawns that is conducive to social connection. If we had permanent seating, then we would have a very different outcome in terms of social bonding and social bridging. So think about those physical attributes and how that affects the outcome of the project. And I'll close with communicating explicitly about a project's community building goals with participants, or the intention of a project can help engage them as formal ambassadors. So when people truly understand the purpose of a project, not just the what is happening, oh, concerts are happening, but the why, the intention behind it. Concerts are happening to build community and to strengthen the social fabric of a community. And when people understand that, they become formal ambassadors for the program throughout the community. We see that with Levitt all the time. We really emphasize on the site that we're here to build community through music. And then when we interview different folks in the audience, they talk about the mission, but that's because that mission has been part of the messaging, the consistent messaging of why and how the space is activated. So with that, I will close with the Levitt Foundation's values on the screen. I'll say this work takes time and commitment, and it can be messy. You have to be willing to take risks, to take a step back, let other leads, to listen, really listen, and put your own ideas and perceptions aside to make room for others to contribute to how a place is realized and how that activation takes shapes. And it is these values that guide the Levitt Foundation in this work, creating opportunities for people to connect, being inclusive in our approach, and certainly creating joyful experiences. We believe joy is a basic human need. It nourishes our souls, and it certainly fuels our cherished shared experiences as communities. With that, I will close. So thank you, and look forward to any questions.
Thank you so much, Sharon. And Crystal and Julia, if you want to join us via webcam, we now have some time for Q&A if any of the attendees do have any questions for any of the presenters or their projects and presentations. I don't see any in there currently, although I know that some questions did come in during Crystal and Julia's presentation that were already answered, and attendees are able to see those answered questions. So that may have answered some of your questions as well. So we'll just kind of wait to see if any questions come in. And I guess I just want to see if any of the presenters have anything they want to add or they want to end with as well while we wait, since we have some time.
Well, I'll just add, if you have a park and you're in a small to mid-sized towns or an open public space, you're in a small to mid-sized town and city, our applications for the AMP program for 2023 will be opening in the spring. So we would encourage you to go to levitt.org and apply to be a grantee of the Levitt Foundation through our Levitt AMP program. And then also our research is available at levitt.org/research. Went through it very quickly. So if you want to dig deeper, certainly go to levitt.org, and we welcome you to dig deeper. And if not, ask questions today, feel free to reach out at a later time and ask questions about our research.
Well, I guess I'll add, come to New York and visit the trails. I think that's really our message. You know, the more people that are out there, the more kind of eyes out on the park, and the more people know that this is an incredible resource to all New Yorkers and visitors to New York. You know, there's a lot of times I think the natural areas in the parks are kind of seen as like the wild place that, like, you know, there's no playground in there, or you know, there's no like water fountain in there, but it's really beautiful in there. And I really encourage you to take a step out onto the trails, and let me know how it goes.
Great. All right. Well, I don't see any additional comments or questions coming in, so I guess we'll just end a little bit early so we can get a little break before I know the next set of sessions start. So again, thank you so much to the presenters. I really appreciate your time and your expertise in these areas, and also thank you to those that attended the session. Enjoy the rest of your day at NORC.
Right.